Welcome back, everybody. It's time to get our lunch programming underway. So once again, my name is Stephanie Gadbois. I'm the Vice President of the Economic Club of Canada, and I am pleased to be your event chair for today's luncheon. Before we begin, we are reminded and we respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory and home of Indigenous people, the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Chippewas, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, lands steeped in a very rich history dating back many generations. The purpose of our acknowledgement today is to show our gratitude and our respect for their contributions and to recognize the role of treaty making in what is now Toronto. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Economic Club, we stand as Canada's national podium of record, and we're the only nonpartisan national public policy platform that unites leaders, innovators, and experts from across different sectors to discuss and address key issues shaping the future of our country. Our foundation is firmly Canadian, but our influence spans well beyond our borders. Our commitment to fostering collaboration, promoting thoughtful debate, and encouraging action continues to drive all of the work that we do. We are delighted to have partnered with Novartis Canada on what is World Cancer Day, with the support of Isologics, BWXT Medical, and Laurentis Energy Partners to present today's luncheon entitled Advancing Cancer Care, Innovations, Insights, and Impact. And to get our event underway, please help me welcome Erin Keith, Vice President of Oncology at Novartis Canada. Let's give her a warm round of applause.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good afternoon, and thank you to the Economic Club of Canada for having us together on World Cancer Day. Today is a reminder that cancer touches everyone, whether you're a patient, a caregiver, a clinician, or a colleague. It's also a reminder of what is possible when science, health systems, and partners move with urgency. Cancer care is changing quickly, from precision diagnostics to new targeted treatments, and our shared job is to make sure these advances reach patients sooner and more equitably across Canada. World Cancer Day is a moment to recognize something that often gets lost in the day-to-day. Cancer is not an abstract issue. It is real, and for many, very personal. It affects families, workplaces, and communities. So when we talk about progress and advancements in cancer care, we are talking about time with loved ones, the ability to keep working, and the chance to plan a future. At Novartis, our purpose is to reimagine medicine. In practical terms, that means bringing the best innovation, the best products, and the best hope to patients in Canada and around the world. We are proud to be a company of firsts across many fields, and in oncology, that pioneering spirit shows up in areas like leukemia, prostate cancer, as well as breast cancer. But innovation only matters if it reaches the patient. One of the toughest challenges in Canada is that last mile, or we'll put it in Canadian measurements, the last kilometer. We have world-class science, yet it can take too long for new options to be reimbursed and make it into everyday routine care. That is why the work of governments, hospitals, clinicians, industry, and patient advocacy has to be aligned, and it has to be urgent. An example of what is possible when partners move with urgency is what Ontario has done with its new accelerated pathway, the FAST program. It is a practical way to shorten the wait for certain high-priority cancer medications, in some cases by over a year. Novartis was one of the first to use the FAST, which means eligible patients in Ontario can now access Scemblix, a treatment for the form of leukemia, about a year sooner than previous. And for people living with cancer, this is not a policy talking point. It is time, it is options, and it's a peace of mind. There is also a competitive dimension we cannot ignore. Around the world, governments are revisiting how they price, procure, and prioritize access to medicines. These policy shifts can influence what therapies are launched first, what clinical trials are placed, and where long-term investments are made. Canada has been doing important work to strengthen its life science ecosystem, including building capacity and investing in innovation. But if we let uncertainty and slow access become the norm, we risk letting this moment pass. That can mean fewer trials, slower launches of new products, and added pressure on supply when patients need medicines the most. We should be clear about what it takes to lead. Being a global life science leader is not a slogan. It requires a predictable environment that rewards innovation, accelerates access, and supports reliable supply. If we get that right, the payoff is straightforward. Patients in Canada benefit first, and they benefit sooner. We at Novartis are also leading in an area where Canada has a global strength, using medical isotopes to treat cancer. Radioligand therapy is some of the most exciting advances in oncology. It uses targeted radiation to seek out cancer cells with precision while sparing healthy tissue. Canada's expertise in isotopes and nuclear medicine gives us a real opportunity to lead not only in discovery, but also in delivery. I want to focus now on breast cancer, particularly early breast cancer. It is an area where progress has been real, but where gaps can still have life-changing consequences. Breast cancer is often discussed as a success story of modern oncology. Screening has improved, treatments have advanced, survival rates are higher than a generation ago, but for many women, the journey does not end with an initial diagnosis or even with remission. I just want to share a personal story, if you allow me to, for a moment. About 20 years ago, one of my closest friends was diagnosed with breast cancer. She was young, full of ambition, and imagining the future she was building for herself. Breast cancer was nowhere in that picture. When the news came, it hit like a brick, shattering assumptions and instantly reshaping her world. But she didn't face it alone. Her community rallied around her. She educated herself, leaned into the support, and moved forward with remarkable determination. And she won that fight. She has an incredible life, full of adventure, purpose, and a career that she has every reason to be super proud of. Then, just 2 months ago, everything changed again. Her cancer came back. A new battle, one she never wanted to fight for a second time. On the phone, I could still hear the same fire in her voice as she mapped out how she was going to take this on. But at the end of our conversation came one quiet admission that cut deeply. I don't want to go through this again. That moment stayed with me because reoccurrence isn't abstract. It's real, it's emotional. And for too many women, it's a fear that shadows every milestone, every plan, every breath of relief after remission. Stories like this remind us that cancer is not always a single chapter. In Canada, more than 30,000 women are diagnosed with breast cancer each year, and for many, the fear is not only the diagnosis itself, but the possibility that it returns and changes everything again. This is where progress matters most. Early screening, including recent moves by provinces in Ontario to lower the screening age, is critical and will save lives. But early detection alone is not enough. We also need to make sure patients can access the best available treatments early on so the risk of recurrence is reduced. And more women can truly move forward with confidence. When we get that right, the impact goes beyond the health system. Women can return to work, care for their families, fully participate in their communities. This is better for patients, better for families, and better for our economy. Ultimately, cancer care has to recognize what stories like this make clear. Cancer is personal, and care needs to be personal too. Doctors and patients need full access to the full range of tools so they can make the right decision for each individual at the right time. Now, in a moment, you will hear from leaders who work at the intersection of science, care delivery, and patient advocacy. The people who see every day what this means for patients and families. Their perspectives bring us back to what this is all about: patients, families, and the outcomes that matter most. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Erin. So it's now time to pivot to our panel discussion. Please help me welcome our moderator today, Megan Ogilvy, health reporter with the Toronto Star. And she's going to be joined by MJ Decoteau, founder and executive director of Rethink Breast Cancer, Dr. Amit Signakur, program medical director, nuclear oncology at Sunnybrook, and finally, Jason Van Wert, president, BWXT Medical. Let's give them a warm round of applause.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you to the audience, and thank you to the Economic Club of Canada for hosting this important topic. As we heard just now, that cancer touches all of us, like probably many in the room, very personally so. Just this week, a friend shared with me that she is facing a new cancer diagnosis and trying to figure out how to navigate that with a young family and a lot of uncertainty. So today, we're here to talk about cancer innovation. It's a very broad topic, almost dauntingly so, because ranging from how cancer is diagnosed to how cancer is treated, to figuring out what patients want and need and how they can advocate for that. We're going to touch on some of those topics, but not all of it. We'll do our best to hit the high points with our panel of experts here today. I'm looking forward to hearing from each of you. So we'll start with a very broad question. When you look at cancer care today compared to even 10 years ago, what change feels most transformative? Amit, would you like to go first?
Sure, pleasure to be here. What I would say over the last 10 years, and maybe we should talk about maybe beyond 10 years, is that 10, 15, 20 years ago, we really had a crude understanding of different types of cancer patients. And so this involved staging patients, whether it was localized disease or cancer that had spread to other areas of the body. And that really dictated how we approached each patient. And so what's really changed for me and for the field is that we are better characterizing these patients. And so a stage 1 patient is not the same as another stage 1 patient. A stage 4 patient is not the same as another stage 4 patient. And this heavy characterization is the result of this precision medicine approach, where we're doing these different tests to figure out what categories these patients fit into. And alongside that, fortunately, we've developed these therapies that target these different mutations and these different protein targets. And so this better understanding of what these different patients are, their exact phenotype, paired with the treatment that's going to specifically address that phenotype has really advanced cancer care. And we're seeing some dramatic responses. And so, example are lung cancer patients. So many of these patients unfortunately present with stage 4 disease, the majority of them, and their survival is less than a year. And so, if you thought about these patients 15, 20 years ago, that was a very, very poor prognosis. But nowadays, what we do is whenever we see these patients, we do a huge panel of testing to see exactly what kind of tumor it is. And we've seen some dramatic responses. We've seen patients live for several years with stage 4 lung cancer. So this is a great success story we've seen in medicine. And so it's been very transformative compared to what's been 15, 20 years ago.
Thank you for that. And MJ, do you want to jump in? If you look back 5, 10, or even 15 years, what do you think has been a transformative change in cancer care?
Oh, I would echo what Amit said. I mean, I'll go back a little further too. My mom was diagnosed with early breast cancer when she was in her late 40s. Caught extremely early, extremely small tumor, no node involvement. But it was a moment in time where we didn't know about the different types of breast cancer. She had her treatment, and unfortunately, it came back to her liver, and she had 7 months. So that was 1992. Then I think about 2015, my mom faced cancer relatively alone. She had friends, but there weren't really communities and groups that you could join and be a part of something. And, Rethink came along, and we started building community for patients and bringing them together and providing support and listening to them. And once we started to do that, we could see, the metastatic patients were just such a glaring unmet need. As we gathered them together, we were losing women back then. Like I'd say in 2012, 2013, if someone announced they were metastatic, they had 2 years, unless they were, maybe HER2 positive at the time. So we did an event called Young and Metastatic in 2015. Much like this, we had women on the stage sharing their lived experience of having metastatic breast cancer. They did all go on to pass, but that event is what inspired us to really step up for the metastatic community. And along came incredibly innovative treatments. Now we have metastatic advisory board members that are reaching double digits of living with MBC. There's always been unicorns, and in fact, we know a unicorn as someone who's been living for 25 years with metastatic. What we're seeing now is something called long haulers. The community is growing, and that they're gaining critical mass because of the improvement in treatments. And what's now happened is these treatments are moving into the early breast cancer space, some of them, that can help people reduce their risk of becoming metastatic. At the same time, we have this growing community of metastatic patients that have high needs. They have a complex care, a lot of scans. It's almost like our system didn't set up for this kind of success. So there's a lot of pressure, and we need more time. But I do celebrate that I have friends living with their metastatic breast cancer 10, 15, 20 years. That's incredible. So I'm excited about the progress.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That does seem like a very concrete example and a meaningful example of innovation. Jason, do you want to jump in? Something in your field, what has been something that's new and exciting and innovative now that you didn't see coming maybe 10 years ago?
Yeah, I think where we are, we're a step away from the patient. We're much earlier in the supply chain, and for us, what innovation meant was looking at supply continuity, reliability of supply. Can we get the costs down? Can we be part of that? So at BWXT, it's been about investment in Canada, investment in Ontario. If you think what we've been spending the last 7 or 8 years doing, we've invested in facilities of power reactors, very high reliability, drives massive volume of product, brings the cost down for everybody. So with partnerships with Ontario Power Generation, Laurentis Energy Partners, we've invested in processing. Our Canada facility is, if not the largest radiopharma processing facility in North America, it's close to being one. So that's allowed us to scale up, develop new drugs, improve the reliability, and really the quality of the work we're doing there as well.
Thank you for that. I think this phrase precision oncology is something that Aaron touched on, and it might be familiar to some of you in the room, but for others, maybe I can ask Amit to explain, what would you, when you had a patient or a family sitting in front of you, how do you explain that topic to them in a way that they can understand and how it will impact them as a patient?
Yeah, so precision oncology is this concept of heavily understanding the patient, right? So, as I kind of said in my introductory remarks, we had some understanding of what these patients were like, but we didn't have a full understanding. And I don't think we still have a full understanding, but we understand them a lot more. And so precision oncology speaks to a number of different testing methods. So that could be genetic testing, multi-omic sequencing, blood tests, liquid biopsies, imaging, which is what I do. So all these things come together and help us figure out, who is the patient in front of us and what is the best approach to treat them. And so, this talk is kind of a little bit more focused on radioligand therapy or theranostics. And so, the example that we give to them, and very simply put, is we treat what we see. What that means is that for the patients, we explain to them that you're going to get an imaging exam, a PET scan. The PET scan is going to tell us, is the target expressed in your body? Is it expressed to a high enough extent that you could benefit from this treatment, right? So what that helps us do is that it helps us differentiate between different patients. And so the patients who need the treatment the most, they get it, and the patients who don't need the treatment don't get it, right? So that really helps us pinpoint the patients who would benefit the most from a particular therapeutic, and it saves all the people who would not benefit the trouble of getting those treatments. So precision oncology, really in my mind, in my field, is treat what you see, do the imaging diagnostic exam, and the ones who fit that criteria, then you go ahead and treat them.
Thank you. And I'm just going to take a moment to say that if anyone in the audience has questions for our panelists, there's a piece of paper in front of you that lets you send me a text. I'll see it come up here, and we can save the questions for the end, or I can add them in as we continue our conversation. Jason, when you hear precision oncology, if you're going to make a pitch to the room, how does this bigger concept fit into what you and your company does?
Yeah, sure. I'll build on what Meet was saying around theranostics, right? Therapy and diagnostics. And I think that's really where you start to get this precision. It's a big part of that precision that we describe. And For us at BWXT, it's having these pairs of isotopes. You know, ideally, your therapeutic would be able to be imaged, and you could see exactly what it's doing. But in some cases, in a lot of cases with alpha therapy treatments, it's just not the case. That quality of diagnostic isn't there. So we're able to find surrogates or pairs. In the case of actinium-225, which is one of our alpha therapies that we produce, indium-111 is a really great surrogate for actinium. Shorter half-life, but it binds really well with the same chelators that actinium does, and allows us to see, as Amit described, how is the patient responding to the treatment, where is the product going, how is it decaying, where is it congregating in the body. So for us, focusing on having those pairs so that we have both the diagnostic agent and the therapy treatment is key.
And MJ, you're here to talk on behalf of a lot of patients. And when it comes to precision oncology, how would you say it's broadly impacting the community? And I want to ask the question maybe in a bit of a different way. Is there any way that it's falling short, that promise that people think that can do, that it's not meeting the need right now?
Okay, two things. I mentioned that in our space, in breast cancer, we didn't plan for success, meaning our systems didn't really plan for success. So we have a growing community of metastatic patients with complex care needs that, you know, are filling our clinics, take a lot of time, need a lot of support, a lot of care. And then we have our early breast cancer patients now also having to make more complicated, complex decisions. You know, many want to do whatever they can to reduce becoming metastatic and not have that recurrence. But these treatments take time to understand, and we don't have a lot of time right now built into our system. So that's one area where we fall short. And, you know, breast cancer, you know, we are having great outcomes, but I think about pancreatic, lung, like all the others. What can we learn from what's currently happening in our breast cancer clinics so that, you know, we are catching up and making sure the entire system doesn't repeat the same challenges? So that comes to mind.
Amit, as a clinician in the clinical space, do you want to respond or jump in about maybe how you frame the promise of precision oncology very broadly to your patients and what it can and can't yet do?
Well, the initial thought really is, in terms of therapeutics, you know, now that you're targeting the patients who would most benefit, and you have this, you know, I kind of describe it as a heat-seeking missile. It goes right to the cancer cells and destroys them, and it spares the normal tissue. So what we've seen, what we indicate to them is that you probably will have less side effects than other chemotherapies with this drug, and that's what we've observed. That's what the clinical trials have shown. That's what we see anecdotally. So this is obviously very appealing for the patients. But one of the challenges that we see with this precision oncology approach from a practical standpoint is our system capacity, right? So nuclear medicine itself is undergoing immense growth in diagnostics and also in therapeutics. And so the demand for the diagnostic scans to see if they're eligible for the treatment is very high. So we're kind of, I think we're doing a pretty good job in Ontario, to be honest with you, but it's still somewhat of a gap in terms of capacity. And for therapeutics, we're simply not outfitted to treat this many patients, right? So I was just recently reading a review, and they were saying that in the States, they predict just for prostate cancer alone, they'll probably have a need to treat 500,000 unique prostate cancer patients. And so Canada's about a tenth the size, so that's 50,000. And we don't have the capacity to treat 50,000 patients in Canada right now. So that's one of the things where, from a practical standpoint, from a systems perspective, it's something that we need to build out, in addition to the fact that we don't have enough people. So health human resources, you know, I'm sure a lot of people here are in nuclear medicine, so we have a big gap in terms of technologists that are pulled in different directions, diagnostics, therapeutics, and so this is one of the big gaps that we need to fill somehow.
Jason, I'll get you to jump in too. When you hear about the system constraints, from where you sit, are there any challenges to get the products that you're building into our systems?
Yeah, I think there's a similar human resources issue with do we have enough people that are trained, that are interested in this space, that can come in and bring the right skill set. So that's something we have to develop. I think too, in Canada, we have an enormous amount of infrastructure. Triumph's a great facility. There are lots of facilities around, but a lot of them are, they're government owned, they're academic institutions, they have priority to research and development. When we rely on them for production and we require that to be 24/7, 365, it's really asking them to step out of what they do well. And I think we need to think about the long run of how do you ensure that the infrastructure that we have available to us has that production mindset that's going to be required to ensure treatments are delivered at the right time, costs are where we want them to be. So that's something that we've been thinking a lot about.
Yeah, I think until I sort of stepped into the space to prepare for the panel, I didn't realize, and like you said, Amit, just the volume of patients that precision oncology, nuclear medicine could impact. One of my questions here, and maybe we've already touched on it a bit, but I think it's worth repeating again. How do these very specific or targeted, you call them heat-seeking missiles, yeah? How do they differ from what we consider traditional radiation or chemotherapy? Again, if we're a patient or a family, could you walk us through that concept again?
Sure. So traditional radiation therapy, basically what you do is use an external source of radiation to treat the patient. And I mean, that's a very crude explanation of radiation oncology. It's very sophisticated these days where you can really target tumors, but you can't target disseminated disease, right? So there's a limit to how many tumor rests that you can treat with radiation oncology. And then with chemotherapy, it's a systemic treatment. Typically in terms of classical chemotherapy, it's trying to address some differences in cell proliferation that's happening or cell growth that's happening in cancer compared to normal tissues. And so you have a lot of off-target toxicity, which means that the patient feels sick, they get nauseous, they lose their hair, those kind of things that we classically think about. So with the radioligand therapy approach or theranostics, really what you have is you have this systemic approach. And so if you think about chemotherapies, it's injected through an intravenous line. Same thing with radioligand therapies, you inject them intravenously. Then they go to the cancer mass or the cancer cells, and when they get there, they bind to its protein target, and they deliver local high-dose radiation to kill those cancer cells, right? So it's kind of I guess it's not perfect to say it's a combination of external beam radiation and chemotherapy. It's something very, very novel. We call it nuclear oncology. And so really these heat-seeking missiles only target the cells that need the treatment and then leave the other cells alone. And so on a macro level, the patient feels much better while they're getting these treatments.
I mean, it sounds, it's your elevator pitch, so I know it's a lot more that goes into that. But from a patient point of view, when patients are newly diagnosed or a family member is newly diagnosed and they're searching, maybe not always with a nuclear oncologist, but online to hear the promise, I wonder if you could help us frame both the promise and some cautions and how you would speak to a patient community about what this means for them in this moment.
Yeah, I mean, innovation comes into the patient's life at a time when they're just have had their life turned upside down. Like, I'm speaking on behalf of our community, which is primarily young women diagnosed. So having this come into their lives in the prime of their life, like everything is affected. They're just, completely devastated. And to try to understand some of these complex issues is not easy. But it's so important because even with innovation, there are always trade-offs. And what we're seeing in our breast cancer space now that we have more and more tools for our community, what I'm loving is that, we're treating the cancer the way you're describing. It's very targeted, and that can mean fewer side effects. That's so amazing. But, everything has trade-offs. And I love what precision oncology could bring is treating the human. So an example would be, someone may be a concert pianist, and so they don't want neuropathy, or someone may have a pre-existing heart condition, so they're going to not want another treatment, but they all want the best possible outcome to live, the best they can for as long as they can. So I'm really excited about that direction that we could go, but as Aaron opened with, our system is definitely kind of not prepared for this yet.
Maybe it's sort of a step away from the patients, Jason, but when we're talking about the promise of, what would you say is a caution? It's not really a barrier, but something that you just want to caution expectations in the room about where you sit in this moment.
Yeah, I think as a key player in the supply chain, the caution is innovation means change, it's new. The reliability of the system, our ability to source the materials, to bring them through the entire supply chain with the regular frequency that we require is still a challenge, right? You're working through some of these kinks. I mentioned at the table, we had a failure of an autoclave, so a sterilization issue a few weeks ago. there was a patient on a table somewhere that didn't get their treatment. And so the entire facility feels terrible. You're working through how do you scale up at the same time. You're trying to build reliability into this system. So I think there's going to be bumps, and you're going to feel it at that patient. Wow, right? The impact there. Overall, we're still doing okay, but there has to be a realization that we're working through building this.
I was going to save this question to the end, but maybe I'll jump in and ask it now. Are we talking about cautions and constraints? This is one of the questions I often ask in interviews, is if you could snap your finger and change one of those constraints to make the system work the way you want it, what would that be? Do you want to jump in, Jason, first?
Sure.
Yeah.
What would I change? I think for us, the key has been access to radiation services. And I spoke a bit about it earlier, that academic institutions have other priorities, and they're there for R&D primarily. I think to really get ourselves to the place we want to be, regional irradiation that's reliable, can be counted on, that's what we are focused on fixing, and really building that redundancy. And if I go maybe a step further, if you think about actinium, everyone's struggling to scale up. How are we going to do it? We don't believe it's one method or another. We believe it's a series of methods that all have relatively different irradiation profiles, have different input materials. Scale all those together and have the right redundancy to drive the program and provide your customers with what they need. So.
Ahmed, I'll ask you the same thing. You talked about maybe some of the constraints in the healthcare system from a human resource or infrastructure. If you could snap your finger and change something that would make these innovations that we're talking about broadly come into clinic faster, what would that be?
I think for me it's easy. I would increase capacity. I think that's a big barrier. These patients, when they come to us, as they work themselves through the system, there's a narrow therapeutic window, right? So, if you wait too long, then they become too sick to progress and they're no longer eligible for the treatment, right? So it's always something that we think about, like how do we come through for the patients? How do we move as quickly as possible, but as safely as possible to make sure they get the treatments on time? So if I were to snap my finger, I would dramatically increase the capacity. And also the education, right? We also need the human health resources, and we need clinicians to really know about this treatment so that if they encounter someone who actually needs a therapeutic, they know to refer to us or other centers that offer it.
And MJ, I think where you sit as a patient, head of a big patient advocacy organization, what role do you play in bringing something that's new from production facility or a lab to the patient's bedside? Can you break it down for us here, what your role is as an advocate?
Yeah, as an organization, Rethink's really here to, first address the patient's isolation, make sure they're getting the support they need, welcome them into a community. By us having a community, we're always listening on the ground, and that's where you start to understand, this is happening to a lot of people. You hear the same problems over and over again. So we're all about community. I always say you can't make change without being really in the community. But we also really try to understand what's our role in this cancer care ecosystem, but we understand the clinician's perspective, we understand our industry partners, and our payers as well. And how can we work together to be that friendly disruptor at the table that's actually bringing recommendations and tangible solutions. And you asked what's one of the shortcomings. I'm so excited about the FAST program. That was something that we were championing and pushing. However, in a province like Ontario and some of the maritime provinces, if you need an oral take-home cancer treatment, FAST is not solving that issue. So now we're seeing, our early breast cancer patients that need an oral therapy to reduce their risk of recurrence are facing the exact same delays, dollars, and distress. So I completely agree with Ahmed in terms of we need investment beyond 2-year government cycles of thinking. We need people to invest in long-term thinking and infrastructure, and that's really, really hard. But I think the benefits we're seeing of people living better and longer, and we're trying to make these cases, and all the patient groups are coming together and trying to make this case, but we need more.
When we spoke earlier, Amit, you had mentioned that there were within 2 cancer advocacy groups, one that whose voice was heard early and one who you felt like his voice was a bit muted. Could you walk the group through those 2 groups?
Yeah, sure. So, delivering cancer treatment to the end user or the patient is more than just making the science happen and making the regulatory stuff happen. I think advocacy has a big part to do with it. And so, currently, the couple of treatments that we do with radioligand therapy are neuroendocrine tumor patients and also prostate cancer patients, advanced prostate cancer. And so, Sunnybrook is one of the centers of excellence for neuroendocrine tumors. And so we've had a lot of experience with them, with their advocacy groups. And they're a very intelligent, very diligent, well-connected group. And I felt they were able to move a lot of things along for their cohort, for their population in terms of diagnostics, in terms of therapeutics. And I think that was a success story. I would say from my perspective, when the prostate cancer drugs had become available, and we kind of saw this happen in Canada where they were available 2 years before they were available in Canada. And I would say the advocacy was maybe fragmented or not as efficient or not as direct as that other patient population. So I think it plays a big part. I know the breast cancer folks have a very, very good advocacy. You're very connected, very organized. But I think if you don't have good advocacy for your particular problem, I think you will run into some issues. That's what I think.
Thank you for that perspective. I've got a few questions coming in, so maybe I'll pause here. Turn to my iPad. From the audience, it says, we discussed capacity and constraints. I'd love to hear the panel's thoughts on moving cancer therapies outside of hospitals. For the ones that you can. I'm not sure I fully... let's talk about moving cancer therapy outside of hospitals. Is that possible in your specialty?
It's already happening in the breast cancer space. I mentioned the challenges of oral take-home cancer treatments not having equal funding. And people are taking their cancer treatments at home a lot. I know that doesn't apply for every type of cancer and not even every type of breast cancer. I do think the bitterest pill oral take-home cancer treatment issue flags the fact that our systems were built for how cancer treatments worked, 15, 20, 30 years ago. Everyone just had chemo in the hospital, and that's how the funding mechanisms work. And now people are taking cancer treatments at home. They're having injections at home, ongoing maintenance therapy. A lot of that's happening outside of the hospital.
I think we can all probably understand why outside of hospital therapy or treatment is important. How would you frame that from a patient's point of view? Why is that so important? What makes that something that people desire?
A couple of reasons. One thing I want to clarify is that, people are wanting the oral cancer treatment because it's the best treatment that's been prescribed for their cancer. It's not a choice of like, oh, I want to take this because I want to be at home because it's, for whatever reason, easier for their lives. It's actually what has been prescribed to them. So I always want to clarify that. The patient isn't asking for an extra choice by taking a take-home cancer treatment. It's what's recommended for their best outcome. And then at the same time, we are knowing that people, not everyone, a choice is so important, but for some people, having your treatment at home is really helpful. Not for everyone, though. So that's why I always bring it back to every patient is different, and choice is really important.
Another question here from the audience is, this is one of my questions later on, so I'll replace it here. For thinking about advancing cancer care, which one of these advances do you think is closest that Canada is getting right? I've read that right. What are we doing right as a country for cancer advances, and what's going to be the biggest impact in the next 5 years?
I would say that where Canada shines, I think we punch way above our weight when it comes to performing clinical trials. I think Canada is a great destination to perform these trials. We perform them at our organization. I know other organizations have performed those as well. And the driver is that there are all these new innovative drugs, but we have to make sure that they're safe and effective, and that has to happen somewhere. And so I think we really punch above our weight when it comes to getting this data to the sponsors, to clinician investigators, and advancing these drugs. So I think that would be my response to that.
Okay.
I think there's been a substantial private investment in this space. If you think about the work that BWXT has done, we have folks here from Kinetrix who've invested, Bruce Power and Ontario Power Generation. That's all private money that's gone into the space to expand capacity, capability. We have the Canadian Nuclear Isotope Council, which, if you were on that in 2018, it was 6 or 8 people. It's grown into an internationally recognized advocacy group for Canadian isotope production. So I think there's been an enormous amount of work by private companies to help build a critical mass here for isotope production.
Okay, thank you. I'll do one more from the iPad, and I'll go back to my list of questions. It's another very broad question, but I think speaks to a lot of what our discussion is today. We've talked about some of the bottlenecks that need to be addressed, and that's capacity issues and health human resources. Can we think of something a bit more specific that speaks to the audience here for research and development? One of those like very specific constraints.
I can talk on that point. So we have a lot of drugs now that are the commercially available drugs are essentially beta emitters, so lutetium-177 without getting too technical. And so, what Jason was referring to was production of actinium. A lot of companies are now focused on this next generation of alpha particle therapies that we feel will probably advance cancer care even further for patients across different tumor types. And one of the barriers that we run into, so this is across academic researchers, small startups, is the access to actinium. And so without an abundant, reliable supply of actinium, it's very hard to do your experiments and do your trials. And we've had some trials that have come to us in the past couple of years that had to be stalled. Some have been terminated just because they didn't have a reliable supply of actinium. So I think that's a major barrier that we need to overcome.
We've got people on the panel here from patient advocacy, from industry, from a hospital, but we've heard earlier in discussion that policymakers and government need to be at the table too. So if you were to speak to one of those people who are in the room today, what would you say to a policymaker or a provincial government about how to move some of these innovations forward from industry to the bedside? Do you want to start, Jason, and then everyone else can jump in?
Sure. I think I've made a few repeated points about private investment. And look, if I think about the infrastructure we built at Ontario Power Generation, massive investment from B2BXT, which is a publicly traded company. We need to show returns. That was done with the thought of where this whole field was going. At that time, we applied for the Strategic Initiative Fund, the SIF funding, was at that time not something seen as something the federal government wanted to invest in. Now you fast forward and you think about that system's approved to produce yttrium, lutetium, and molybdenum. The hundreds of thousands of people that will be, probably millions of people over the life of that facility that will be positively impacted. I think there's an opportunity for government support, whether in the form of grants, tax breaks. There needs to be a little bit more support there when private industry is willing to start.
MJ, if you were in a room with the policymakers, which I know you are from time to time, but if they were here today, what would you say as a way to break through some of these constraints that have been coming up in our discussion?
Yeah. I mean, I can sort of repeat that call for longer-term investment. I know it's hard for politicians, but you can get in front of them with a powerful patient story and like a heart-wrenching story, and that's all really, really important. But I just think we need to think about the long term. We need to think, what's the benefit that these are having. So that kind of concept of value-based system. So don't just think about, okay, what is the cost to treat this cancer? What is the benefit to our society, to our economy, to have people not becoming metastatic? That's so important. So I know there's been efforts to try to shift that thinking from, okay, how much is this going to cost, to like, what is the benefit of this investment? And we need to keep bringing that forward.
I like how you framed that. And I know we're sort of touching on same old ground, but specifically for policymakers, for government, we know that we work within a constrained healthcare system, and that there's competing voices across the spectrum from primary care to precision oncology. But for those of us in the room who want to talk about, for you who want to talk to policymakers, what would you say?
So maybe I'll take a couple of approaches. So the first one is, of course, investing into the infrastructure. And so we've been talking about these advanced treatments and PET imaging and all that, but we don't have enough imaging capacity when it just comes to basic CTs and MRIs, right? So you need this exam before even you get to the cool stuff like PET CTs and these advanced therapies. So you need to invest in those things. And you have to kind of think about, the government needs to think about And I agree with MJ's point on these short election cycles where you're not really investing for the next 10, 20, 30 years, is that if you don't make these investments, then you're missing these patients at early stages of disease, and then you have to deal with them when they're metastatic, right? So why even wait till that happens? So, if we kind of increase the capacity earlier on in terms of access to these imaging modalities, even screening, right? I mean, I would put a lot of money into screening folks as well and make sure that the education is there for different patient populations, right? So you look at different socioeconomic status of people and different postal codes, they get screened much less than folks who are in more affluent areas. But we're in a public health system, we're in it together, and so we have to kind of invest more in these areas to make sure that everyone has good access to care very early on. And the benefit is that your costs will actually decrease if you catch it early and treat it well.
I'm really glad that you brought up equity and access. It was something that I wanted to get to in our conversation. We have about 4 minutes left, so let's end on equity and access. There's a question here from the iPad, so I think it's something that we're thinking about in the room. We can think about equity and access across the province. Different provinces and territories bring therapies in at different times, fund them in different ways. But then we have, as you note, Amit, equity and access issues within our communities. Very broadly, if each of you want to speak to the top of mind thing that comes for equity and access for what we talked about today, I think we can end our conversation on that. Do you want to start, MJ?
Sure. I'd love to see a future where equity isn't a special project afterwards. It's like not something that we're trying to patch and catch up, that we're thinking about it always from the beginning of how is this going to work for everybody. And I just want to highlight, we have a campaign called Make Me Count. And, you think about innovation, I always think about data and, big data. And it's quite shocking that currently our cancer data collection and what we report on is so high level. We're missing a lot of nuance. We're not even capturing metastatic recurrence. And that, again, is because these systems were set up at a time when people died within a year or two. But we need to have a better understanding of, race-based data, socioeconomic data, metastatic recurrence, if we're actually going to be able to come up with an understanding of where are the gaps, who's falling through them, and how can we fix them. That's work that still needs to be done, but I imagine a future where that's all taken care of and, we're not having to think about equity and gaps after the fact.
For us, because we're not at the patient level, equity is a little bit more geographical. So, if we think about who can afford these treatments, the United States is funding a significant amount of the product that we ship, and then the Western world, and you see a disparity on who gets access to some of these innovative treatments. Our role is to drive the cost down, right? That's the best thing that we can do to ensure more people get access to it.
Thank you. I just want to emphasize that the U.S., we always feel like we're behind them. Most people in the U.S. are not accessing a lot of these innovations, so I just want to get that out there.
The point I was going to make about equity is we deal with a difficult geography. We have a huge landmass. Ontario is no different. We have a very, very huge landmass. And so one of the things that we think about is how to get these treatments to remote communities. And so it's not always pleasant or feasible to travel, hours and hours and hours to get a cycle of treatment and then do that 6 times. So that's one of the things that at Ontario Health, that's one of the things we're trying to figure out is how to get these treatments available to remote communities so that everyone who's eligible, who could benefit from it, can actually get a hold of this treatment. So this is one of the things that's kind of front of mind for us.
All right. I think we're counting down to our final seconds, so I want to thank each of our panelists. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope that everyone in the room has too. So thank you, Amit. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, MJ.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to the panel. Can I get another round of applause for that? That was inspiring. Thank you to each of you for your insights, your innovation, and obviously your inspiring talk. I'm Kimberly Carson. I'm the CEO of Breast Cancer Canada. And today, it's my honor to sort of wrap up everything that we heard today. I think what we heard is that there's a lot of innovation in Canada that we do. I love that comment that we punch above our weight. I see it globally. I know MJ sees it globally, that we as experts in this field, do very, very well worldwide, but we don't always listen to ourselves in Canada. So again, calling out the policymakers and the government is really important. They need to be at the table. They need to understand what we're bringing worldwide and how to apply it here in Canada. So I think further to all of the points that were made today, I think it was really important to hear that, particularly from people that work in that field on an ongoing basis. So one of the last things that they finished on was equity, and what Breast Cancer Canada is doing is two things to try to bring equity to Canada. The first is the Real Alliance. The Real Alliance is a multidisciplinary group of medical specialists across this country that are world-renowned, known very well in different countries, well-published, and what they're doing is standardizing treatment for breast cancer patients here in Canada. This is really innovative work. They're published. There are recent publications coming out. We were hoping this week, but it's not out yet. It's peer-reviewed. It's published in Current Oncology. And what they're trying to do is say, no matter where you live in this country, you should have access to the same treatment as every breast cancer patient. That means it doesn't matter if you live rural or if you live in an urban setting. This should be the treatment pathway, and it's based on innovation. It's based on what's new, what's the latest treatment changing practice worldwide, regardless of what's available here in Canada. So whether that drug is approved or whether it's not, it will be written up as standard treatment of care that we should have access to right here in Canada. So very proud of what they're doing. We're also working with government agencies on that project as well to see if we can make that standard of care here in Canada. So more to come on that one. And that they're also represented across most provinces in the country, including Quebec. And the second piece, further to what MJ was talking about with, people not understanding the data, not understanding the reoccurrence, is we have Progress Tracker. And what Progress Tracker is the patient voice. So we follow patients for 10 years on their lived experience, and we ask them 4 times a year to provide us with the information that what they're going through, what they're experiencing, and yes, it does capture patients that have reoccurred. It's not perfect, but it certainly gives us data to go back to policymakers and government to say, look, we're not getting this right. We don't have it all well done yet. So can we use this data? It's an ethics-approved research study. And why I bring these two to your attention today is a really great example of how collaboration can work and how we can actually move the needle when we collaborate together. And that means bringing policymakers, bringing your medical oncologists and your radiation oncologists, your surgical oncologists, genomics and genetics and pharmacology together, and how we bring the patient voice to that at the same time so that we can improve outcomes. And although we do this for breast cancer, it's not unique necessarily. There's other cancer organizations that are looking at establishing the same type of programs in their organization. So we're really proud of this. We're proud to take it globally. We're proud to fund the Real Alliance and making sure that the Real Alliance is a global voice on treatment and care for breast cancer. And our tagline is, obviously, because when research meets the real world, we change people's lives. So I hope you were inspired today. Thank you very much to the Economic Club and to Novartis for partnering today to bring this to all of you on World Cancer Day. It is top of mind for many people that are affected. I'm sure you have colleagues, friends, family members that are patients, and I think it's a great day to celebrate what innovations are being made right here in Canada and what we're bringing to Canadian patients. So thank you very much.
So just a final thank you to all of our speakers today, Erin, Megan, MJ, Dr. Amit, Jason, and Kimberly, for sharing all of your insights and helping to make today's discussion so impactful. So much work still needs to be done. And this is a conversation the Economic Club of Canada will continue to push forward year over year. So on behalf of everyone at the Economic Club, a big thank you to Novartis Canada for helping facilitate today's luncheon, as well as thank you to our supporting sponsors for all of your help, BWXT Medical, Isologic, and Laurentis Energy Partners. Now, please mark your calendars for our next Economic Club of Canada event. Coming up on March the 12th, we'll mark our third in our series of 3 women's health events. This one is entitled Breaking the Silence on Women's Reproductive Health. Join us alongside Manulife registration is open. You can find more details on our website. Once again, thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.